common sense, but that's not the point. The point is that if they're ever going to be able to look at themselves in the mirror again, or ever get a good night's sleep, then they're going to have to be able to tell themselves that they've done absolutely everything they possibly could. That's where private dicks come into it. We're kind of the last bent straw in the milkshake of their lives. My 45th birthday rolled around about 6 months back, and the timing couldn't have been better. The advent of no-fault divorce, combined with the digital revolution, had reduced my calling to little more than data input. As skip tracing and bail recovery held little appeal, I found myself at a middle-aged crossroads. Had it not been for my old man's long-ago insight, I'd probably be working in a Burger King by now. Instead, I was stretched out on a chaise lounge in the backyard of the family manse, a cold one hard by my elbow, kicking back, enjoying the intermittent sunshine, watching the remnants of my father's political machine stumble and cavort around a pile of fresh topsoil like decadent earth trolls. Big Bill Waterman's political empire hadn't survived his passing. Before he was cold in the ground, several of his closest confidants were indicted and later convicted on a laundry list of charges ranging from fraudulent appropriation of public funds to immigration law violations. City and state governments spent a decade and over $3 million trying to wrest his considerable estate back into the public pocket, and out of mine, but failed miserably. Even in death, he was slicker than they were. The local press had a field day with it. For the better part of a month after his death, his face adorned Section A of both papers as the newshound sought to sell papers and grease the slow-turning wheels of justice. All of which made it kind of hard for me to mourn my father's passing. The guy in the paper, the one they accused of all those improprieties, that big, scowling visage bore scant resemblance to the man I'd always called Dad. To me, my dad was just my dad. All the hoopla made it so I wasn't quite sure which one of them was real and which one wasn't, which of them deserved my sadness and which deserved his fate, or either, or neither, or both. There weren't many of his old cronies left anymore. Most of them had passed away. All that remained were a couple of minor functionaries who'd managed to avoid the dragnet, the last of the crew of drunks and reprobates for whom I still felt a certain sense of personal responsibility. No telling what course their lives might have taken had they not become entwined with my old man and his backroom dealings. Back when I was a full-time PI, I used to invent work for them. By that time, they'd succumbed to serious substance abuse and perennial homelessness and needed all the help they could get. Besides, if you could keep them conscious, they made excellent surveillance operatives. In urban society, the homeless and destitute have become virtually invisible. We treat them like some kind of nasty apparition and subconsciously train ourselves to look the other way. They could loiter outside a building for days without anyone taking the slightest notice. These days, I find them odd jobs whenever I can. Today, it was gardening, replacing a couple of ancient rhododendrons that had perished over the winter. A couple of days back, I'd stopped by the East Lake Zoo, told Manny, the daytime bartender, that I was looking for a little landscaping help on Saturday. Free beer and a shovel. A little pocket money on the way home. Tell the boys if they happen to stop by. Manny picked his teeth with a matchbook and said he'd pass it on. 5 of them showed up. Late, drunk, and in shambles, but that was to be expected. George Paris was one of the originals. Somewhere around 70 now, he had a face like a satchel and a body to match. George used to be a prominent local banker, one of the cadre of financial specialists who hatched the serpentine scheme to launder my old man's money. Just far enough down the authority ladder to avoid criminal prosecution, he'd been summarily cast adrift by the bank, divorced by a well-to-do wife, and jettisoned into the streets like a discarded gum wrapper. For the past 20 years, he'd bounced from gutter to gutter. Blown by the wind, fueled by an ocean of cheap booze and bitter memories, he'd managed to maintain both his keen intelligence and his acidic sense of humor. Ralph Batista wasn't so lucky. Bleary-eyed and thin as a wire, he'd been a mid-level official for the Port of Seattle when my old man died and the excrement met the proverbial cooling device. Served short time in the county lockup on a plethora of charges relating to the smuggling of human cargo through the port, and then was likewise cast upon the streets. The years hadn't been as kind to Ralph as they'd been to George. Decades of self-abuse had cut his functional IQ in half. Ralph wandered through the world looking for his next drink in a constant state of wonder and semi-confusion. If it weren't for George looking out for him, he'd undoubtedly have been dead by now. The other three I'd picked up along the way. Billy Bob Fung had a thick Tennessee drawl and skittered through his days in a state of mild amusement, nodding and smiling at everything that went on around him. If you'd put a gun to his head...